Bonjour tout le monde! Aujourd'hui, on va parler des verbes réfléchis. Alors, vous avez devant vous un paragraphe, ce que je vais maintenant lire. Ce week-end, je me suis amusée beaucoup. D'abord, comme c'était le week-end, je ne me suis pas réveillée tôt. Je me suis détendue au lit jusqu'à 10 heures. Mon frère, par contre, s'est levé à 6 heures du matin pour un match de hockey. Quelle horreur! Ensuite, je me suis levée, je me suis douchée et je me suis brossé les cheveux. J'ai pris des œufs avec du bacon. C'est pas vraiment le petit déjeuner, mais plutôt le brunch. Après de manger, je me suis brossé les dents et je me suis habillée. Je me suis inquiétée un peu pour la météo, mais il faisait très beau et je me suis promenée au parc avec mon chien. Il a joué dans la boue, alors quand nous sommes rentrés, je me suis lavé les mains et les pieds encore une fois. Le soir, je me suis préparée pour aller au cinéma avec des amis. Nous nous sommes habillés élégamment et nous nous sommes beaucoup amusés au ciné. Je me suis couchée à 2 heures du matin, mais c'était excellent. Alors tout ça, all of this, these are in the, well, they're in a very interesting form, right? So if you see, je me suis amusée, is it the present? No. Is it the imperative, the command form? Also no. Is it a past tense somehow? Yes, and specifically it's what we call the passé composé. So the passé composé is literally the composed past, and we say it's composed because it has two parts. It's composed of two parts. The first part is the helping verb, être or avoir. It's one of those two always, and we call this in French the auxiliaire. And the second part is the past participle, which we call in French the participe passé. It's very imaginative, right? So, and for reflexive verbs, obviously, we're also going to have a reflexive pronoun in there somewhere. Now, the passé composé describes distinct events in the past. I got up, I brushed my teeth, I washed my face, I put on clothes, I worried, I hurried, etc. Oui. For other ways of talking about the past, we will have other forms, and we'll get to those later. So the passé composé, the auxiliaire for reflexive verbs, it's always going to be être. And obviously, we know how to conjugate être. Oui, je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. Easy peasy. The participe passé is a little bit trickier. Usually, it's going to end in e accent aigu, which, as you know, makes the sound e. Sometimes it will end in I or U. Very infrequently, it will end in something else. And that participe passé is always going to be the same for that verb. So if the participe passé of se réveiller is réveiller, that's always what it is. It's never going to be anything else. It's not going to change. So, je me suis assis, tu t'es assis, il s'est assis, nous nous sommes assis, vous vous êtes assis, ils se sont assis. That assis, 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 assis is the same for every form of that verb. And even if we went into a different composed tense, which you'll learn about probably next year, we would still have it be assis. So if you have your yellow sheet handy, actually, if you don't have your yellow sheet handy, you should get that out because we're going to look at it real quick. But and if you need to pause. So your yellow sheet has those forms to fill in, right? Se réveiller, réveiller, se brosser, brosser, se lever, lever, etc., etc. How we fill those in class. Se détendre, note, is détendu. S'entendre, entendu. S'endormir, endormi. Se souvenir, souvenu. S'asseoir, assis. Those are the ones that are a little bit different. But everything else is just going to be e accent aigu. And it is worth noting that even if we have a verb like se lever, s'inquiéter, where we sometimes have an accent change in the present, we don't worry about that for the passé composé. We just leave it exactly like it is in the infinitive, but cross out the er and add the accent aigu. And the same thing for s'ennuyer, where we have that y. We're like, oh, what do we do with the y? Nope, easy. Chop off the er, accent aigu, right? So, word order is pretty straightforward. We've seen it a couple times now. It's going to be je, the subject, the reflexive, the auxiliary, the past participle, or to not put that in code, je me suis amusé ce weekend. What if we want to make that negative? we have our ne, we have our pas. We're going to put one of them right up there and one of them right there. We're going to sandwich the me suis, the reflexive and its auxiliary. And we're going to make the sentence, for example, je ne me suis pas amusé ce weekend. And so that's how the negation works in the passé composé. So hopefully you all did the homework last night. So we're going to just take a quick look over those. I'll check them in class when I see you next. Marc et Farid, ils se sont disputés. Le prof s'est fâché. Je me suis brossé les dents. Carole s'est coiffée. Le cowboy s'est souvenu. Ma sœur s'est endormie. Madame s'est trompée. Les garçons se sont habillés. Tu t'es ennuyé. Mes parents se sont assis. Émilie s'est cassé le pied, etc. But, Madame, that should have been easy, but Madame, you should be saying right now. You said that the past participle never changes, that it was always the same for the verb, that the past participle of disputer would always be disputé. So why is the first answer ils se sont disputés with an S and not ils se sont disputés with no S? And it's all because of l'accord. So l'accord means agreement, and it's a very important part of learning French. It's basically just making everything match up with itself, right? Making all of the parts in the sentence match up. In English, we don't really care so much about agreement. In French, we care a lot more. So far, we mostly dealt with accord in terms of adjectives and professions. So, for example, we would say pour les grands, but Marie est grande, because for a feminine subject, we're going to have a feminine adjective. We would say Ralph est banquier, et Marie est banquière, because she is a feminine banker, he is a masculine banker. Tu es intelligent, mais nous sommes intelligents avec S, because it's suddenly plural, so we're going to add an S even onto that adjective. But verbs can agree too in some very specific circumstances. So when we have a reflexive verb, in the passé composé, we will make the past participle agree with the subject in two ways. We'll make it agree in gender and in number, which is the same ways that we're always thinking about agreement. If it's feminine, we're going to add an E. If it's plural, we're going to add an S. If it's feminine and plural, we're going to add an E and an S. It's crazy. So what that looks like, for example, if we take the verb se réveiller, we're going to say Paul s'est réveillé with nothing at the end, standard. Marie s'est réveillée, add an extra E because she's feminine. Marc et Thomas se sont réveillés, we're going to add an S because there's two of them and they're masculine. Marc et Thomas se sont réveillés à 6h30. Isabelle et Elisabeth se sont réveillés, ES extra, à 7h, because they are both feminine and plural. Oui? And you don't really hear that in how you say it. Se réveiller, se réveiller, se sont réveillés, se sont réveillés. The ES, E, we can't hear it. Ça n'influence pas la prononciation. Does it influence the way you're going to write? It does. So in the interest of being as precise and as accurate as we possibly can, we are going to write right? All right. So we have two exceptions here. Exception one is, well, what if you have an S and an S? And this is really only a problem for the verb s'asseoir. But for example sentences, for example, Paul s'est assis, Thomas s'est assis. They're both gentlemen, so we're not going to add an E, but we might add an S if we put them together. Paul et Thomas se sont assis. So that assis doesn't look great. And in fact, we're not going to bother with it. We're just going to say Paul et Thomas. S plus another S just is an S still. Paul et Thomas se sont assis, one S, standard issue. And this is the same as with an adjective like français. Paul et Thomas sont français. We're not going to double up the S because it just looks silly. Right? So that's exception one, and it's really only a problem, like I said, for the verb s'asseoir. And the other exception is a little bit more tricky. And it's when is an accord not d'accord? When is accord not okay? So for this, I'm I want you to turn back to the handout you got, that example sentence, and think about when do we not make an accord. And hopefully what you realize is that we don't make accord in the past passé composé of reflexive verbs when it's a body part. Yeah? So what this is when we use reflexive verbs to talk about body parts, we don't agree with the subject because of obscure French reasons. It will make a lot more sense about a year from now. I promise you we will get there. You can ask the kids in French 3. I promise we get there. But for right now, we're just going to hang tight. Jane s'est lavée. If she's washing herself, we're fine. But if we're specifying what body part she washed, elle s'est lavé les mains, elle s'est lavé les cheveux, elle s'est lavé les pieds. Anytime we're specifying, we're just not going to agree at all. We don't need to bother with it. And so again, this is not something that's going to influence all verbs because a lot of them just can't take a body part onto them. So verbs like s'inquiéter, se dépêcher, se promener, right? But if you're talking about usually se laver, se brosser, se regarder, maybe se maquiller if you really want to stretch, yeah, pretty much that's it. You just need to be aware if there's a body part directly involved, you're gonna ignore everything I taught you about agreement. Okay? So, pour les devoirs, this will give you a second sheet of paper, and this is just some conjugation. You're going to conjugate each verb twice. First in the present, and then in the passé composé. So if your example sentence is se fâcher, you're going to say aujourd'hui, today, Sarah se fâche contre son petit frère. She gets mad at her brother today. Hier, elle s'est fâchée contre sa petite sœur. So today she gets mad at her brother. Yesterday she got mad, passé composé, contre sa petite sœur. So again, think about your reflexive, your helping verb, your participe passé with maybe agreement, maybe not, depending on what you want to say. So that's all I have for you. Merci beaucoup. I will see you tomorrow. Et bonne journée tout le monde. Ciao.